Health today. My name is Jim Davis. I'm the director of the Good Athlete Project, the staff and student wellness coordinator at New Trier High School, and the director of the Illinois High School Powerlifting Association. With me today is Avery Rush. Avery is he started as an intern, but he's quickly becoming an important part of the project specific to Team Embrace. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I am working with Team Embrace, which is part of the Athlete Project specified in mental health and athletics. I wanted to ask you sort of how Team Embrace became part of the Good Athlete Project.
Yeah, absolutely. So Team Embrace, the name Team Embrace, it refers to this idea of embracing the conversation of mental health within athletics. We know that athletics can have a really positive impact on one's mental health. We also don't go as far as to make the assumption that it is a cure in any way. We don't overstate the value, but we do recognize the value of athletics as it pertains to mental health. So embracing the conversation of mental health in athletics, that's really what we're making a big push for. So creating a culture that supports the conversation of mental health, equipping students, student athletes and coaches with the desire to do it, some strategies and the language to do it. That feels really important because, like you and I talked about before we hit record, it's really, we said there's no way to truly be quote unquote right in any given situation. But we should be open to the conversation almost constantly. There's no like mental health fix in sports. But if we want to support people, it'll be sort of the cultivation of, like I said, a culture and an organic, ongoing process of supporting that sort of culture, given the ebbs and flows of a specific context, environment, or look, we just finished 2020, or national, sort of global conversation. It's got to be an ongoing process.
One point that I want to touch on that you mentioned is strategies. What are strategies that you've implemented through your programs or through your other aspects of the work that you do that have helped create a culture where you can openly talk about mental health?
It's a really good question, and the strategy will have to shift place by place, but it will always start, I believe, with coaches modeling an openness to the conversation. And this sort of, in my specific, daily environment as a coach, it came up by necessity. I don't know how many years ago it was at this point, but we lost one of our athletes. He died by suicide, and that changed the way I think about a lot of things personally. So it sort of started out of necessity. Something meaningful happened within our program, and we recognized that we as coaches, and that's top to bottom, from all the way up into administration, that we have to model an openness to this sort of conversation. We go back and forth with it, if I'm being totally honest, because we try to be both tough and kind, competitive and caring. We don't want to take an environment like a powerlifting team or a football team or wrestling team and say, and forget that there is a toughness needed here. You have to be, I don't know if anyone's wrestled before, but you cannot wrestle if you're not tough, period. And what we're really trying to open up, what we embrace in our environment, is the idea that that's not different necessarily than being open to difficult conversations. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You can be the toughest wrestler, football player, powerlifter, whatever, lacrosse player, as between the lines, you're the toughest person around. But that doesn't mean you can't go check in on a teammate when he or she is feeling down. It doesn't mean you can't acknowledge when you are feeling down and go seek support. In fact, we often say we've got a card that we hand out at powerlifting meets that says, are you strong enough for a tough conversation? Because the truth is, these conversations are oftentimes very difficult. In fact, we push hard against the idea that any of this would be pushed into the category of soft skill. having conversations about your mental health or the mental health of a peer is anything but soft. That is difficult. And we want to make sure that people recognize that within our culture, again, starting with the coaches, that we're open to the conversation. This doesn't change who you are as a person or athlete. It's essential to who you are, in fact, as a person or athlete. Being vulnerable is a challenge. Moving through this sort of obstacle is tough, and it's actually directly aligned with our performance outcomes as athletes. And we to really get to your question, strategy-wise, we just don't let a day or a week pass without bringing it up, and it's as simple as that.
That's amazing. That's really what you want, at least from my perspective and experiences I've had within my athletics programs. Another thing, you brought this up as well during that talk about strategy, but one of the hardest parts of approaching mental health in athletics is that dichotomy of toughness, that strength that you have to have, and that perseverance, but also recognizing that physical strength and toughness in the moment of competition is not the same, or is not, as you said, mutually exclusive to being open about how you're feeling and what you're going through. And I know that broaching that topic can be difficult, especially with young athletes, and definitely with older coaches and older people as well. So what are some of the specific language that you use to begin the conversation?
You're exactly right. You're right, because the next step, once you create a culture or an atmosphere that embraces this sort of conversation, is sometimes literally taking people by the hand and saying, and here's what you say. Because that's, once I feel open to it, I'm picturing myself as like a high school football player. I was at one point. Now that I'm open to it, I'm still an adolescent in a high school trying to navigate a complicated social situation. And, the lunchroom can be as challenging a situation for a high schooler as anything else you might face on the field, say. So now that I'm open to it, how do I broach the conversation? How do I begin to engage? And the way that we have done it is we run what we call team embrace workshops. We do it at New Trier in-house. We do it at other schools via Zoom at this point in time. But there's really no good way to do it without sourcing the group that you're working with. The best you and I could do is make a really good guess. So what we do is we run these workshops where we source that sort of information from young people, and then we provide young people with a resource that specifically is aimed at that. So based on the language in a specific culture, I don't know, is it, hey dude, you know what I mean? Like, hey dude, I'm not feeling real good, or we've tossed the idea around. I don't know if we've ever nailed it as a hardline component of one of our resources, but almost like code words, like what I mean when I say, hey dude, I'm not feeling real good. You know what I mean? Hypothetically. But without going any farther on that, we talked about it again before we hit record. When we talk to a team in Ireland, that's different than a team in Chicago, on the north side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, south side of Chicago. It's different than the team in Boston. It's different than the team in Haiti. So again, we know the sentiment, we understand the sentiment, but the process of identifying what language do we equip people with to ultimately advocate for themselves or reach out to a peer, that has to come from the group. So obviously enough, there's no easy fix. You've got to be really intentional and do that work of asking them.
Yeah, I think really important, and you mentioned this definitely, is that, recognizing that each person is their own individual, right? So the language that you're going to use with that person is going to be a little bit different than the language you use with someone else. Now, there's no specific set of guidelines of these are the things you need to say, right?
Right.
Suggestions, but like you said, depending on the culture that you're in or the program or the group, the social construct of the people you're with, right? Like, what is the dynamic? The language is going to change a little bit, and I think it's important to recognize.
And you probably have been part of this. I know I have. I think back to when I was in high school and college, we would do some workshops. I think one of the things that distinguishes the Good Athlete Project from some of the things that I experience, and it's fueled by the experience of myself and the people within the project. Like those workshops can be really clunky. You know, if you just tell me what I should say, and you know what I mean? Like if it's, you know, 40, 50-year-old, really well-educated people, I'm not being ageist. I hope to be that age, you know, in the not terribly distant future, actually. You know, there will always be a gap between, you know, maybe this is, to go back to our idea, this might be right. This is, you know, this sentiment is right. This sounds pretty right to us in a room together, but there's always going to be a gap between that sentiment and usability on the front with the kids in a specific context. So being able to bridge that gap takes away the clunkiness, and that's really what you're trying to do. Is make it feel organic and easy and part of the culture. This is normal to have this sort of discussion.
Yeah, 100%. I think something that's been really helpful in my time at Earlham College with our lacrosse program is our head coach. He's very open about his mental health, and he talks with us, and we do group settings. No one's forced to talk. No one has to say anything, but the door is open, and you know, he makes it known regularly that that door is open, and I think that's been helpful for us personally.
And for whatever reason, something just stood out to me when you said he was open about his mental health. I hope we get to the point where we're just open about health. You know what I mean? Where it's not necessarily totally distinguished between mental health and physical health. There's definitely an overlap between the two. We're seeing it play out in real time during the quarantine. You know, excessive sedentariness has a direct correlation with mental health. If people are sitting, eating Cheetos, not sleeping well, you're going to feel the fallout in your own personal psychology. So I'm really glad to hear that your coach is being open, and I hope we can get it to the point where it's an open discussion, where it's as common as talking about our fitness or our strength goals or our speed goals and things like that. You know?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It would be nice to be in a situation where, you know, telling someone like, oh, I have the sniffles is the same thing as saying like, hey, I'm not feeling 100% today.
There you go. Yeah. And we'll see what we can do about it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So sort of just start wrapping up. I wanted to know one particular story that stands out to you where you saw, it can be a coach or an athlete, someone in your program that felt empowered by the mental health stuff that you guys talk about and do, and you saw a change in them.
We have, I feel really fortunate to, I don't know what it is, but my staff, product of a good culture within the staff, I think, and within our athletic settings, I've been exposed to where people have been fairly open with a lot of their concerns, mental, physical, whatever. So I feel like I'd have a lot of stories to share there, and I won't share them all. I'll focus on one. But before I say it, it's a basic one, and I'll keep it totally anonymous. And it's actually not, anyway, it's not someone from my direct circle, which is why I think it's probably the right one to share. But I would also say that if we're doing it right, it's almost like it can be like a no news is good news situation, which is a tough. Which is something I think that all coaches engaging in this sort of work should acknowledge, is that you're not always going to, if you do it right and create a positive atmosphere for people where they are empowered and they don't fall into a bad way, you won't hear about it. And that's good. It's kind of hard to keep that in mind, but I think coaching is a hard job, so that's okay. So with that recognition that probably a lot of the success stories are ones that I don't know anything about really and can't share anything specifically, I would share one, and that is it was after the 2019 Illinois High School Powerlifting Association State Championship. And it was that event is so cool. We have a series of regional events that move into it. It's a 200-person co-ed, invite-only state championship. Pre-COVID, it was wall to wall with people and parents and fans, and it was just a really cool thing to be part of. And whether it's at the regional, but especially at the state meet, we at the Good Athlete Project, we embed messaging into everything we do. So We talk about like when you're under a squat bar, what character trait are you working on? When you're at the sticking point in the base of a squat and it's so much easier to give up, but you push through, what is that? Is that grit? Is that resilience? Whatever. And then we ask people to identify how they transfer that to other areas of your life. So, you know, you've become strong and good at squatting. What does that get you other than squatting? Hopefully something important. And we really try to shine a light on that. We also really try to shine a light on mental health. We do it all the time. Like I said, are you strong enough for a tough conversation? That's sort of the prevailing mantra in the Illinois High School Powerlifting Association subliminal messaging. We talk about it all the time. We donate a big check at the state meet to some sort of mental health initiative. And after one of those meets at the 2019 state meet, we had a young person come up to me. And we're cleaning up. You know, we've just pulled off this really cool event, state records broken, the whole deal. And she came up and she was in tears. And I was like, is she okay? Did someone snag her wallet or something like that? Is, you know, they were tears of happiness. And she was saying, she found me in the crowd and gave me a hug and said, I can't thank you enough. You have no idea how impactful this has been for me. And then she showed me her arm, and she had a scar on her wrist. There was a suicide attempt earlier in her life, and she had essentially become empowered through strength training and the great coaches at her school and so many good people that she was surrounded by. But came up and in tears showed this incredible gratitude just for the platform that we had set up for her and her teammates and the messaging that we were normalizing. And it was like, Avery, it was like just like a crystallizing moment. It's like, yeah, that's right. That was meaningful. State records aside, this matters. So that felt really good.
Because as a coach, right, like those, when you're in athletics and a player has a light bulb moment when, you know, maybe it's football and you've been trying to teach them this technique or this coverage or whatever it is, and they haven't did it. And then, you know, in an integral moment of the game, it clicks and they make a play and you just see them light up because they know they did everything. And that as a coach is an amazing feeling. So I can only begin to imagine what that must have been like for you.
It was meaningful, and what it did was, like I said, in this sort of work, no news is good news. So where does the propulsion come from? You just have to kind of constantly, as a coach, remind yourself that this is worthwhile, this is meaningful. But every so often, you get, you know, sort of tangible nods to that effort. And I think it's important for coaches. I think maybe this is kind of a coaching strategy to stockpile some of the stories like that in your life, and know that if you hear one, if one comes to you, there's probably a dozen out there that did not. And that should be something that fuels your work.
I think that's part of the reason why for Team Embrace, for our Instagram page, we try to highlight, you know, really well-known athletes, very successful athletes in their field, because it creates that, well, if they can experience this, then so can I, right? Like if this peak athlete who is in amazing shape and they're, you know, wealthy and famous and they've been to the Olympics and they've won gold medal. You know, recently we've posted something about Michael Phelps, and we will be posting stuff about Simone Biles and stuff like that. Like if these, you know, peak of human ability people can experience these struggles, then it's okay that I do. Yeah.
You're totally right, man. I'm so grateful for you highlighting so many of those stories. Because it matters. We're social creatures. We need to see the heroes do it. You know, you and I can talk about it, and I think and hope that it's meaningful. And then when you hear it from you know, an all NBA player, hypothetically, it means just a little bit more. And right or wrong, that's the society that we exist in. So I appreciate you doing that. And I do, and you just mentioned, I hope people check out our Instagram page. I hope people check out teamembrace.net. We're providing an increasing amount of I think, very positive resources there. And I think I guess to wrap up, thank you, Avery, for all the work that you're doing. I mean that very sincerely. And I hope anyone who watches this will feel free to reach out to keep the conversation going. Like I mentioned, we're a nonprofit organization. You know, this is meaningful work. We want to do it. We host team embrace workshops with teams, with professionals, with individuals. Actually, I've got a call in about an hour to do some of that work with an individual. So there are options out there. There are resources for you. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's embrace the conversation of mental health and athletics, and hopefully we'll be able to bring